Keith Roberts, and I am doing week 4 attending presentation. This week we were asked to get a sheet of paper and get a central thought, and then begin to springboard around that one thought in the center of our paper, what we felt like the center of our passage was. My passage is Luke chapter 4, verse 31 through 44, where Jesus arrives into town, and on the morning he goes to synagogue on the Sabbath day, and while he's in the synagogue, a demon-possessed man comes in, and they are at the synagogue for a period of time, and then they make their way to Peter's house, and Peter's mother-in-law was sick, and she's healed. And then from that, there's a crowd of people that gather around, and Jesus literally heals people until daybreak the next day. And my thoughts were, if you notice my center of the page, it is a clock. And I imagine somewhat the show. I don't know if you ever watched it, but The West Wing. When The West Wing starts up, and it's always two characters at the beginning, and they're conversing and talking and walking down a hall. And this is what comes to my mind as we talked about images and such. These two are walking down the hall, and as they're walking, the cameras, you don't see the cameras, but they're moving along. They're walking very briskly, very fast. They're going from one room into the next. People are clearing out of the way, and you can just feel the busy nature that must be at the White House. And that's what comes to mind when I think about this day, how it started and begins very early in the morning. And at the top here, you see that it began with a very traditional thing. Jesus is just starting his ministry. He's fresh out of the wilderness at the first part of this particular chapter. He hasn't called his disciples yet. That doesn't happen until the next chapter. He begins to call Peter, James, and John. And so Jesus is at the very beginning, and it starts with something very traditional and very ceremonial. And he is ministering in the temple, in the synagogue rather, and as he ministers, you notice the next thing, there's a real problem enters in. And I'm not sure how certain I am about how long this demoniac man had been there, what kind of problems he had caused in town, or any of those things. But I do imagine that the ceremony was not enough to take care of his problem. And with a real problem, we find came a real answer. And Jesus took care of that. In fact, one of the things that they say is, this man, who is he that he can even speak to the demons, the devils? And they answer him. And so this thing takes place. And, as I'm thinking about the things surrounding about this time, I'm imagining them as they leave that place. And you notice these arrows are kind of taking us down through the day. That it almost becomes like a circus. Is this real? Is it fake? Is this? They've never seen anything like it. It's like being at a magician show. Things were going through my mind like at a circus and attraction, more like a freak show almost, to come and see what's happened. So this crowd, I don't think they were reluctant, but they were very skeptic of what they had seen. Very unsure of what they had seen. But they saw enough that they followed him to Peter's house. And so now this real problem in this circus, or rather real answer in this circus that's following him, enter into this real sick home. I think of death. In my mind's eye, I could hear organ music. I could hear that sad sound. Taps was playing in the background, like something bad was about to happen. And Jesus walks into that situation again, and of course she is healed. And now these that were skeptic, these that were not knowing if it was fake or real, they understand this guy is the real deal. And again, the bustle of that time, the bustle of the day, and day as it continues to go, And the Bible says as it become evening that night that they begin to bring the sick to him. Now the story's out and everybody comes. And so this real answer finds, real believers that really believe enough that they're bringing their family and their loved ones and their sick friends, and there's real demons, and there's real disease, and there's real cripple, and there's real deafness, and there's real blindness, and these things that had been such real problems where tradition and ceremony did not take care of them. Now there's a real answer. And I hear again as I'm writing these things down, I hear the sound of like a grandfather clock in the background, like time is marching, and there's only so much time to get these things done. I see masses of people. I see, the audience here, or rather on the audience here, and then the audience becomes a crowd, and things are just beginning to get started. And you notice it at the very front there, I put the beginning. And as Jesus goes through this 24-hour day, beginning early one morning in the synagogue and ending early morning out after so many had been healed and he had found a quiet place to get alone, when they come to him again, approximately 24 hours have passed. And what had begun, now we're finding out will have no end. And that's the things that I came up with on my presentation, and the things that came to mind, these things that spoke to me. And if you have any advice or anything that you want to add, feel free to leave it in the forum. I'm very interested in what you have to say, things maybe that you thought of that I've missed. But thank you for listening to this presentation today.